Voices, which is a statewide citizen-funded advocate for clean air, clean water, and open spaces.
Thank you, Cypress. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that the way that we currently use water has on our environment and our way of life, and then talk about what's happening at the legislature and some opportunities we have to save water. So as Drew was mentioning, obviously, over-pumping aquifers can have a big impact on endangered species. We also have, many water rights, many rivers have actually been over-appropriated, so if everyone actually used their full water rights, the rivers would be completely dry. And that would obviously have a lot of impact both on the wildlife as well as the recreation opportunities on those rivers. And so that was already the system. Of course, then with the droughts, our waterways were hit doubly hard, along with farmers and all of us. But we saw 300 million trees die because of the drought. Stretches of some rivers like the Guadalupe and the Brazos, the Rio Grande ran dry. Scientists had to evacuate several species of fish from some West Texas rivers to save them. The whooping cranes, that migrate thousands of miles to our coast every winter were impacted by the low flows. So clearly, I think the drought has underscored that the way that we currently use our water is not sustainable, and that we need to make some major changes in order to accommodate the fact that our population is going to grow 80% in the next 50 years, and there's going to be increasing stress on our waterways. And so the good news is that we have lots of opportunities to save water. And we really want to make sure that we're focusing on conservation first as we're talking about how to meet our water needs in the future, because some of the alternatives could be quite harmful to the environment. So for example, there's a proposal to build the Marvin Nichols Reservoir in northeast Texas, which would flood 30,000 acres of increasingly rare bottomland forest and another 42,000 acres of family ranches. All to provide water to Dallas to water their lawns, basically. And that would also, basically would put a river, 40 miles of river underwater forever and impact wildlife in that area. And there's many other projects, whether it's pumping of aquifers or transporting through pipelines. Requires a huge amount of energy. The more energy we're using, more climate change we're contributing to. And then other projects like desal, for example, both use lots of energy as well as could produce a brine waste that's quite contaminating, especially if we don't handle it properly. So we want to make sure that as we are planning our water future, we are exhausting all the efficiency and conservation that we have, and we have lots of it. We have lots of untapped potential for conservation. So, as Karen mentioned, agriculture in Texas uses 56% of the water in the state, and there's lots of opportunity to save water through advanced irrigation systems, lining of canals, metering, laser leveling of fields, lots of opportunities there. Cities make up the next biggest chunk of water use. Landscaping alone, just watering our lawns uses about 10% of the state's water. And there's lots of opportunities to switch to drought-resistant plants or xeriscaping, or just improving the sprinklers that are a lot of them are broken or outdated and waste huge amounts of water. So opportunities to help save water there. Next, I'd highlight is electric power generation. By 2060, power plants are expected to use about 7.5% of the state's water. So big nuclear plants or coal-fired power plants require enormous amounts of water to cool the power plants. They're actually responsible for about half of the nation's water withdrawals, but like I said, it'll be about 7.5% of the state's water consumption. So a lot of that water goes back into the rivers, but still, that's an enormous amount of water. And so we have opportunities to invest more in solar and wind and energy efficiency as a way to save water and save energy. Or switch power plants to dry cooling technologies that use far less water. Oil and gas is a growing user of water. Last year we estimate that fracking used about 25 billion gallons of water. And that's, while statewide that actually is only a smaller percentage, in certain communities like in South Texas in the Eagle Ford Shale or in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that can represent as much as 40 or 50% of the community's water. And unlike other forms of water use, with fracking, the contaminated waste is largely injected underground, where it's removed forever from the hydrologic cycle or the hydrological cycle, as Karen said. And so, with fracking, of course, there are, there's lots of problems with fracking, but one way to kind of minimize the damage would be requiring the drillers to recycle and reuse that frack water. So rather than continuing to pull more and more fresh water out of our rivers and then putting waste underground, which, again, can cause risks or fears of contamination, but also are now increasingly linked to earthquakes, you may have heard about. We could require them to recycle and reuse that water or use brackish water instead of fresh water. So lots of opportunities to save water. The state water plan, as Karen mentioned, estimates that we'll get about 24% of our future water needs from conservation and another 10% from reuse. So about a third will come from kind of conservation or reuse kind of projects. And likely that lowballs the true potential. The state water plan is mostly just kind of a wish list of traditional interests, dam builders and other pipeline interests, kind of putting their projects. Conservation is really just an afterthought. There's a water plan's a 250-page document. There's like a paragraph associated with conservation. So we think there's lots more potential, and so we're working to get half of any money from any state water funding to go to conservation, reuse, to fix the leaking pipes. The Water Development Board estimates that we lose enough water from leaking water mains to meet the needs of 2.4 million Texans every year. So just fix the pipes to start with. And then we need to set aside some money to buy water rights to keep water in our rivers for wildlife and for recreation. So what's happening is, you may have heard there have been calls, the governor and other state leaders have called for using the rainy day fund to create a infrastructure fund for water projects. There have been two major bills filed, SB4 by Senator Troy Frazier, who's from Horseshoe Bay, just west of here, and then HB4, Senator Frazier is also the chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, and then Representative Alan Ritter, who's from Nederland out in East Texas. He's the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. He's filed HB4. So they both would take $2 billion from the rainy day fund and would create kind of an infrastructure, kind of revolving loan funds where they offer grants to, whether it's to build a new dam or a pipeline project or a desalination project or hopefully agriculture conservation programs. And then the interest brought in from those low interest loans the idea would grow the fund to someday be valued at $26 billion, which is what the estimate of what the state's going to need to contribute to meet our future water needs, according to the Water Development Board. So Representative Ritter's bill sets aside 20% of the funding for conservation and reuse, and Senator Frazier's bill sets aside 10% for conservation and reuse. So we'd like to see a lot more. Like I said, even the state water plan suggests that 34% of our future water needs are going to come from conservation. So we should at least be doing that. We think that, ideally we're doing more. So, other things that we want to really see is the Water Development Board to develop a stronger prioritization process so that before they give out these grants, they're making sure that utilities are maximizing conservation and maximizing repairs to leaking pipes and other things before they give out the grants. So the cities that have done those things first will be first in line to get that money, and I think that will help really limit some of the harmful supply side projects that are being talked about. So there's a hearing on Tuesday, the Senate Natural Resources Committee, to talk about SB4. So it'll be, I think it's invited testimony only, but there'll be hearings over the next few weeks around all of that. And we'll stop there.